Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here with a special report for you, and I'm quite excited and pleased to announce that the Men's Rights Subreddit has reached 150,000 subscribers. I'm pretty excited at this, and when I first saw this, I remembered, thinking back, just going off of memory, that the Men's Rights it was around 100,000 subscribers about 2 years ago. So it had grown by about 50%. And so when I actually looked it up, I found a voiceformen.com, an old article. This is a great men's rights publisher and website, so check it out. It says, last week, the subreddit Men's Rights reached the important milestone of 100,000 subscribers, making it anything but an obscure corner of the internet. It still grows by more than 100 new subs a day on average. And so they did an interview with one of the moderators of Men's Rights. At the time, it's about an hour long if you want to check that out. I will be linking, as I always do, I'll be linking this article in the description. And so we see that the date of 100,000 subscribers was November 19th, 2014. So the end of 2014 it's basically about 2.5 years that it's been. So pretty excited about the quick growth. I expect the growth to continue even faster as we get bigger. The reach only gets to be more, and also, men's rights have gone from having a negative perception to a positive one. Effectively, what gave men's rights a negative perception is it had a lot to do with feminism standing in the way of men's rights, and because they viewed, in their ideology, they view men as a problem. There's the patriarchy theory, and they have a zero-sum mentality where a dollar that goes towards a man is a dollar that doesn't go towards a woman in terms of help, whether that's on homelessness, domestic abuse, or many other issues. So for those of you who don't really know, some people may say, well, what issues do men face? And just a few that I wrote down, mainly taken from, I took them from the frequently asked questions on here, so you can check it out if you want more information. But and there are many other issues, but child custody, and I would just say the family courts in general, child support, alimony, divorce. Men tend to have a tough time and tend to get screwed, where it's not just that the outcomes aren't favorable to men, it's that the process isn't fair to men. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the process is, written in law legislatively that is anti-male. But say you have judges that tend to favor women over men. Well, that the whole process now becomes anti-male. And it's not just things like that, where you have a lot of issues where I think a lot of it stems from in child custody, where the child will stay with the woman temporarily, and then they'll say, you guys are splitting. The children have to go somewhere. We'll give them to the woman for the start, and then we'll figure out who does, where the children would be best at for custody, and we'll go from there. But then what ends up happening is they say, oh, the children have been in school, and it would, maybe the man has more money and can provide better for them, for the children, and it's just overall better for the children, but we'll let them stay where they are because we don't want to take them out of their current school and all of that. And so the temporary placement, which isn't supposed to be used against the man, actually does indirectly get used against him. And that creates, and because the temporary placement is often the woman by default, that creates a situation where the entire process is unfair to men, even though it's not written to be unfair to men. And I think sometimes people get too hung up just in the legislative process. There's the executive and judicial branches as well, and you have to look at all of them together. And if there's an issue with any side of it, it can make, if the police go around, and there's like the Duluth model where if there's a domestic dispute and they can't tell who was the aggressor in a fight, they'll just arrest the man by default. And that would be an executive branch overreach. It's not how the law is written legislatively. In the court system, the judicial branch, those, they're going to usually be free, or there's maybe not even any charges filed. But in the meantime, he could lose his job. Will have to sit in jail for a little while, usually overnight, and that can be traumatizing. And that gives the woman time to pack things up and often steal stuff and take children and basically disappear a lot of times without the man even knowing where she went, and without having an ability to contact her or anything like that. So you have to really look at all the branches. And then so some other issues that are the vilification of men in society, the sentencing gap, which is where even when you adjust for variables, it's like, think of the pay gap, where I know a lot of times feminists will say there's a pay gap, and but then when you look into it and all the different variables and you adjust for those variables, sure, women are paid more than, or men are paid more than women, but it's for good reasons, like they work more hours. Well, that's in the sentencing gap, that's actually accounted for. And after it's like a 275% gap. And after you account for variables, it's still like 125% gap, if I remember right. Sorry, I'm going off of memory here, but it's in the Myth of Male Power. They talk about it, and so, and that's accounting for criminal background, prior history, the history of sentences and all of that. So then you have things like the education gap, and that's where boys and men are graduating at lower rates than women. They are dropping out at higher rates than women. They are just struggling more overall, and yet there are more things to help women graduate and get into college than men. There are more programs, and there are more female only financial help and things like that. So then you go on to other issues like false accusations. A lot of people are aware of that by now. What some people call male genital mutilation, also known as male circumcision, mainly done, at the infant stage. I think this one is I think this one is up for debate, but I think it's an interesting and important debate. I see a lot of aspects to this where there's the child to think about, and his ability to decide, but obviously he can't decide something like this until later. And then you have the procedure to think about, where as time goes on the procedure becomes more difficult. You have the science to think about, which has been muddied. You have a lot of countries, basically most Western societies, ban circumcision on infants, and except for the U.S. So, but the U.S. claims, like the CDC claims that, and many other, actually there's like 4 or 5 different health organizations that actually recommend the procedure, and they claim small benefits, like preventing, a small prevention benefit of penile cancer or HIV or some STDs, and whether that circumcision actually prevents all of these things is up for debate. And the percentage, when does it become worthwhile to go through with the circumcision? How effective does the prevention have to be? If the prevention is only 1%, is that enough? If it's 10%, is that enough? So and then there are like fatherhood rights and just parental rights in general. Who should decide? Because effectively, if you when it comes to circumcision, if you're gonna say you can't get a circumcision until you're an adult, you can't really then argue that you're for the patient choosing, which is what INT activists and men's rights activists that are for banning circumcision. Because what they've told me is, and this will give you some insight into the debate within the men's rights movement, which I'm more of the unicorn. Most men's rights activists, to be clear, are for the banning of circumcision, but I think a lot of people don't really think it through entirely. And so if you really look at it, what's the effect going to be? So a child will be actually banned from deciding until they're 18. And so I keep being told that people are against circumcision as infants because they want the child to be able to decide. But they're going to say, oh, you're 15? You're not old enough to decide. You're 16? You're not old enough to decide. You're 17? You're not old enough to decide. Because it's going to be when you're adult. Even if it's when you're 16 or 15, there's always going to be a cutoff. And so when does that cutoff happen? It's going to be a one-size-fits-all cutoff. And the effect is going to be, we're taking the decision away from the parent to choose. And from a men's rights perspective, you're taking the decision away from the father to decide for his own child. And you're giving it to the government. And you're saying, okay, now the government's going to tell the child that what they can't do. And they're going to tell the parents what they can't do. They can't, you can't decide to have for your child to have a circumcision. And child, you can't decide to be circumcised. And it's claimed that it's more of a cosmetic procedure, which, that's up for debate on the health effects, why I want to see more science on this. But there are many, American health organizations like the CDC and many others. It's not just one; it's like 5 of them. They actually encourage circumcision. Now, whether they have some nefarious reason for that or not, I think you'd have to show that they do. So, which I haven't seen a good argument to say that the CDC is acting in their own self-interest. It hasn't been proven to me that that's the case. So, that's kind of the nuance of that debate. And I would rather the parents decide for their children rather than the government. And I would... the other thing is I really think that when anti-activists say that they want they want to ban circumcision so that the child can decide later in his life, I really think that their goal is to eliminate circumcisions, because they'll remember the procedure later in their life. It'll be harder for them to get one, more expensive. And the procedure is cheapest when they're youngest. It does the least amount of harm. It's the least dangerous. It's the and the child won't remember it. And so you add all this up, and the procedure is much better to be done at a young age, in terms of getting past the whole decision aspect, unlike who decides, but just from a purely harm standpoint, the least amount of harm is done when the child is youngest. So while circumcision or male genital mutilation is on there, I don't necessarily agree that should be banned legislatively, and I think that it'd be a much better policy to try to change people's minds culturally and say, okay, parents, this is why you shouldn't have your kids circumcised. And I think that anti-activists could pretty much eliminate circumcisions culturally anyways. So I just think it's a better way to do it. And then you have and by the way, this is with all these issues. There's no issue where all men's rights activists agree. Men's rights isn't really centralized. So if you talk to different men's rights activists, you kind of have to feel them out and figure out, what do they actually believe? What issues do they buy into? A lot of people are single issue men's rights activists. So, because maybe there's, maybe a father who lost his children unfairly, that, the child custody might be all that he cares about. So then the recognition of male victims is an issue, especially a lot of times the government will do research on female victims and things like prostitution and even domestic violence and stuff, and they won't even look for male victims. And when they do look for male victims, usually they find many more than they expect. And when I say look for male victims, I'm talking they won't include men at all as a potential to be victims. And things like rape, the definition won't include a lot of ways that men are raped. For instance, forced envelopment, when a man is forced to penetrate a woman, that is not considered rape. That is considered sexual assault. because rape is centered around, legally it's centered around penetration. But of course, a lot of ways that men can be raped aren't penetration. So that's very, the ways women are raped mainly are through penetration. So then you have things like workplace deaths, where it's not surprising that there are more males that die in the workplace, but the fact that 90 to 95% of the deaths in the workplace are male, that's an issue where it'd be nice to see, this issue taken on, and try to minimize the amount of deaths in the workplace, especially among men. Then there are high suicide rates among men, where 80% of suicides are male. Selective service being male only, even though women, can volunteer. It's only men that are forced to register for selective service, and if they don't, they have all kinds of rights taken away. You can see my previous video on that. Then there's a lack of social support on a lot of issues. I've mentioned like domestic violence victim shelters for men, homeless shelters for men, things like that. So there are a lot of other issues. The transgender issue is an interesting one, and I would say that suicide is high among the transgender community, but there's a kind of a definitional issue here. Is that female to male transgender? Do they fall within men's rights? Is a male to female transgender person? Do they fall within men's rights? Do both? Do neither? I would for sure include male to female transgenders. I wouldn't have a problem with female to male transgenders being included, but I see female to male transgenders as being a female sex, even if they have a male gender. So but I don't have a problem with being more inclusive. So I think, whatever issues come up. So, and it doesn't actually defining things as men's rights issues. It's not really the definition that matters too much, to be honest. So these are some issues within men's rights, and there are plenty more. But let's talk a little bit about how did men's rights get beyond the hatred and that it was receiving, and how did it grow? Well, it grew with people like Warren Farrell offering substance, and then people like Paul Elam, who was willing to take a personal hit socially in order to bring on a lot of negative attention to force the media to cover men's issues. And the thought was, any attention is positive, and any attention, I should say, is a good thing when they're completely blacking you out, because you just want to get your name out there. And now that we've kind of gone beyond that, Paul Elam and Voice for Men and others that were just trying to get attention have really reinvented themselves to become going for more of a positive image, and the MensRights Subreddit has always been going for a positive image. And you have people like the Honey Badgers that are Karen Strong, Allison, Hannah, Brian, all of those people. Cherry, I forgot her actual name, but they do a great job mainstreaming. They're kind of like a hybrid from MensRights Subreddit and Voice for Men, and they do a great job mainstreaming a lot of these issues and debating, the average person on different platforms like Twitter and things like that. And the impact of this has been great because, so first they tried to ignore the men's rights movement, and then they, feminists and the mainstream media, they tried to take us on, and they started losing. So then they started trying to ban us, and now they're they're opening things back up, and they're trying to adjust their strategy, and they're trying to debate with us some more, and they're losing. Like, they used to be the majority, and they're still in positions of power, but I would say there's more men's rights activists now than there are feminists, and I think that's astounding. And maybe more men's rights activists is the wrong term. There are more people against feminism now than there are for feminism. I'll word it that way, because a lot of people that are against feminism wouldn't actually say I'm a men's rights activist. A lot of people don't like those labels too. So the other aspect to this, the whole reason I explained the bit I just did was because being known is key. You can't really be helped if you're not known. So now we're known. And the reason, and I think it was really when we reached around 100,000 subscribers, that's when we were really known. And then we blew up. Actually, for reasons I think that were outside of the men's rights. There were a couple key events, and the way feminism works, I think it's feminism that has made men's rights blow up, to be honest. And to explain that, feminism has been anti-men's rights and trying to shut us down in every way. But they also go around and try to take over other movements. So they tried to take over the atheist movement, the Gamergate movement, even the free speech movement, which is a bit of a joke because they're so pro-censorship. And basically they'll take over these movements, and then they'll be, a feminist might be an atheist and a feminist, but they will push their feminism over their atheism to an atheist community at atheist events. And so you had all these conventions that were going on, and there were speeches and stuff, and there was this one feminist, Rebecca Watson, who gave a speech that was more about feminism than atheism. Turns around and when her speech is done, she leaves through this elevator. There's a man in there and said, "Hey, I liked your speech. Would you like to come to my room for coffee?" And she claimed this was like a rape threat, and attacked the atheist community. Richard Dawkins told her how ridiculous she was being. Then the feminists started attacking him, and the atheist movement split between the feminists and the basically people who were more allied with the atheism side and free speech side, I would even say. And so there was that split. And then I think every time you had where feminists have gone in and tried to take a movement over, it just turns that movement over to men's rights activists, because those people start to look at what other groups are feminists attacking, and they see men's rights mainly, and then they wonder all the stuff they've heard about men's rights activists, is it true? And they find out through very little research that it's not true. And the more they interact, and the more they find out about us, they realize, like, we're not women hating at all. We're more pro men's rights, ending inequality against men. It really doesn't have a whole lot to do with women, except that, like, feminism, claims to be like the sole source of women's rights, which it's not, and then attacks us. That's basically what it comes down to. It's more anti-feminism because we want to get men's rights out there than it is anti-women's rights. And so I think that whole atheism issue really damaged the credibility of feminism, and it was like the first chink in the armor. And they started going around to, what atheism had at the time was awesome. They had all these conventions and stuff, and like feminists would start to go and like target their political opponents, and with sexual harassment charges, and people started getting banned, and now nobody goes to these conventions anymore. It's kind of sad. But then you had a Gamergate, and feminists targeted Gamergate. This was huge. Men's rights activists went and started training up, in my eyes, Gamergaters, because they didn't realize what was going on at first. And so feminists went in, they were trying to change, gaming to fit their ideology, trying to force, they were trying to force artists, game makers and stuff to make characters that they wanted made, and they were trying to force, the communities to ban misogynists and all of that kind of stuff. So basically anybody who disagreed with them. And there was an issue with Gamergaters kind of started. They also had this ethics in journalism, because some feminists were like trying to sleep around to advance their career and stuff, and just women in general. There had been a few women that were like basically sleeping with men to get benefits effectively. And so there were certain magazines and stuff that got exclusive content. So basically they would be the only ones that could announce the release of a game or something like that. And the model of journalism wasn't good, and that clashed with with this feminist narrative, and the more feminism got involved, like this Gamergate versus feminism thing blew up. And men's rights activists were like, here, these are their arguments. This is why you're not getting through to them. And here's some, here are some issues that prove them wrong. Here's some substance that proves them wrong. Because we've been dealing with them for a long time. And they started to get it, and they started developing their own arguments from that. And Gamergate was the biggest thing in probably ever to erode the trust the public had in feminism, and to really expose feminism for what it was, an ideology, not just like women being for women's rights, and not just being for equality, but this entire ideology got exposed. And again, after Gamergate, the men's rights subreddit really blew up extensively, even much more than when the atheism issue happened. And then you had there was a movie called The Red Pill, which is a men's rights documentary, effectively, and it's explaining what men's rights activists are and what men's rights issues are, and the battle between men's rights and feminists, and why feminists don't like men's rights, and this started to intersect with free speech advocates, because feminists were trying to shut this documentary down from being created. And so Milo Yiannopoulos helped fund, and his followers helped fund, along with there was some funding from the men's rights movement, but most of the funding came from Milo's following, because he had a huge following. And through that documentary, it turned out to win a bunch of awards that really exposed the feminists, the leading feminists. Like, if the people in that documentary aren't feminists, then who are? If they can't give the best arguments for feminism, then who can? And so it was really a problem for feminism, and it helped, the men's rights subreddit blow up even more. So I really think that it's feminism that has helped the men's rights movement blow up, probably more than anything. But don't get me wrong, men's rights activists have done a lot to enable that to happen, and have gone to battle for a long time to get noticed. And I think it's up from here, and I think you're going to start seeing men's rights get into the government and start changing policies. And there are some parties that incorporate men's rights in the UK and elsewhere. So overall, I hope you learned something about the men's rights movement and the history of the recent history of it, and some of the issues that are incorporated, and why it's growing. And I encourage you to go to the men's rights subreddit, look around, post, subscribe, go to A Voice for Men, and look up, let's see what they have up right now. Never mind disease. Guess who wants to talk gender as a pre-existing condition? Jesus. Military commanders pressured to convict dubious rape cases. Man-hating TV ads, no joke, Janice. Dr. Paul C. Bennett of Dunedin, New Zealand, known genital mutilator. Martyrs of Marriage, a review. And then you have on the men's rights. So those are some of the articles they have. And on the hot articles on the men's rights subreddit, or the posts I should say, you have the happy 150,000th help with arguments. So if you click this, this is, some people will come here asking for, there's I see a lot of girl power, pussy power, male tears, things, slogans like that everywhere, and I find this annoying. And so they're going to be asking for advice on how to form their arguments, and men's rights activists will generally give quite a bit of help. Sign in women's bathroom. It shows some of the advancement. Men can't be sexually harassed, and then it says false. Anyone can be sexually harassed. So a common feminist argument is that men can't be the victims of sexual harassment because they're in the positions of power. Just like white people can't be, they think that white people can't be the victims of racism. The red pill, this is Cassie J, and her quote, "It wasn't learning about men's issues that made me part with feminism. It was actually learning about feminism that made me leave feminism." I don't think there could be a quote that, ex-feminists could agree with more than this. Like, I think people can really relate to that. It says wealthy bachelors are getting vasectomies so gold diggers can't trap them. New York City using my tax dollars to advertise they will help people win a government contract as long as you are not a man and white. Saw this on Jezebel Facebook handle. Men make more money than women. They rarely have to sacrifice their careers to raising families. They have fewer obstacles to educational and employment opportunities. They're far less vulnerable to abuse, and they're getting their knickers in a twist because someone's hosting a women-only screening of Wonder Woman. So it just shows, if there was something that was male only, and we know this because there used to be male only clubs and things like that, and they did get shut down, and it is considered illegal in a lot of areas to advertise on the basis of sex, gender identity, or any of that, and to only allow those certain groups based on even race and other things like that as well, to use to go to something like a movie or buy a product or something like that. And when it comes to women getting a privilege of being the only ones to get to go see a movie or something like that, suddenly they think that's okay, even though it's complete discrimination against men. So this one says there are all these tags too. Look at the tags: false accusation, discrimination, fathers in custody, and then you can click here and you can filter by these whatever issue you care about. It says a woman whose mother and brother committed suicide after he was falsely accused of rape admits she was on the brink of taking her own life as she struggled with losing her whole world. And that shows the impact of false accusations, not only of the accused, but on the people that love the accused, including women that love the accused, and the accused are usually male victims, the falsely accused. So you have let's see, social issues. Fiance stabbed me 28 times and left me an hour away from death just weeks after asking me to marry her. It's kind of some crazy stuff. General, what do you think about this historian's analysis of gender roles throughout history? It's titled Sex Power, Why Men Are Expendable and Women Are Different. There's something called the empathy gap, which is where society is more willing to give up the life of a man than the life of a woman, which is, part of the reason that it's a biological issue, and it's, men are more, it's part of the reason they're forced in the military, why women aren't, and it's part of the reason why they take more dangerous jobs, why men are expected to be the providers more often, and a lot of it comes down to the empathy gap. We don't even think twice that men don't live nearly as long as women. It's like the gap is like 7 years, and people don't even talk about it much. Questions, Rational Wiki, where's all the responses to it online? Education, occupation, some Saturday sanity. This hardworking man wakes up every morning to do one of society's worst jobs in order to feed his family, and you want to disrespect him? And it's a man who works on garbage for a garbage truck, you know. And it is amazing, like, garbage truck or trash men or whatever you want to call them, how they're viewed in society, because it's a job that needs to be done, and it really isn't like it's actually a pretty good job to have. And like, garbage men can actually make a decent amount of money, and it's not like they're digging through the trash, they're throwing the trash in the truck. And I don't know, it's just weird how society views them so negatively. But anyways, I'm gonna cut that here. You can look through this if you want. If you do, subscribe. I always suggest, check out the new page. I think that's always much better than just looking at the hot page, because this is where you'll see all the new stuff. And this is interesting. Tom Golden, who is a psychologist, he responds to Lacey Green. He's a men's rights psychologist, and he responded to Lacey Green, who is a feminist. So I'm sure that YouTube video would be interesting. So anyways, have a good one, guys. Congratulations to the Men's Rights Subreddit for 150,000 subscribers, and I'm looking forward to seeing the advancements in the future.